Hi, my name's Derek. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm an alcoholic who does a lot of general service. As such, I've bumped into the concepts along my spiritual journey, and I'm inviting you to bump into them too via these videos. And look, I want to be really clear though about what these videos are not trying to be. Please note, therefore, the 12 concept essays, which you'll find in the AA Australia Service Manual, are to general service what the big book is to the steps. As such, this video series seeks to quote directly from them, not water their message down to avoid being dry or boring. In other words, we're not going to patronise you here or give you cartoons or something really zhuzhy and general. And, so it's one video per concept, and we're looking at the prime resource for what the concepts mean, which are these 12 essays, which you'll find in the AA Australia Manual. And I'd love you to read the entire essay. We're not going to go through the entire essays. I'm going to pick and choose which paragraphs to focus on to extrapolate key ideas. But the idea is to encourage you, to titillate you, to get you curious enough to read the entire essay. That's really what is expected of us if we're doing general service. To extrapolate from how it works for a moment, if you want what those who do general service have, and you're willing to go to any length to participate spiritually in general service, then you're ready to take certain steps, e.g. read the concept essays more than once if necessary. I've found that it's a good thing to do, just like with the big book. Or the 12 and 12, it's good to read these things more than once because insight develops over multiple reads. And then carry out what is being suggested. Something that I do see happening in general service sometimes, and sometimes not so much. What I've found is in my participation in general service, which is getting on to 7 or 8 years of it in a row, when we actually do what is suggested, steps, traditions, concepts, things usually work out a lot better than when we don't. That's just been my experience. A couple of basic things. Here's America and Australia. In Australia, they call the whole sort of service structure World Services, and the business name for AA is World Services Inc. What they call World Services, we call general service, in other words, how we do things nationally, our service structure, and our business name is AA, or Alcoholics Anonymous Australia Limited. So when you read anything about general service, and the concepts are really where you'll read the most about what Americans call and Canadians call world services, we call it general service. The concepts read as if there is no other service structure anywhere in the world. It's very American-Canadian focused in terms of what it talks about. We need to extrapolate a little, therefore. General service, World Services, World Service Inc. AA Australia Limited. And look, the other thing I'll say is we have a great service manual in AA Australia, and I actually think the service manual is very much an extrapolation of traditions and steps and concepts into how we do general service and many other things in AA. And it's a really nice practical extrapolation of these 36 principles, these 3 legacies into a how-to guide. And I think it's a really lovely document to get your head around too. Anyway, let's look at why we have concepts. And this is from the introduction to the concept essays by Bill W. And he wrote this around 1960. The 12 concepts for world service to be described in this manual, service manual, are an interpretation of the AA world service structure, and I'll show that in a minute. They reveal the evolution by which it has arrived in its present form, 1960, and they detail the experience and reasoning on which our operation stands today. So when we do general service, be you at a district or whether you're your group's GSR or whether you're part of an area or part of the general service conference nationally, we're looking at AA's operation, how we operate as an entity, as an organisation, if you will. That's the focus of general service. These concepts, therefore, aim to record the why of our service structure, our organisational structure, if you like, in such a fashion that the highly valuable experience of the past and the lessons we have drawn from that experience can never be forgotten or lost. Same thing they did with the steps in the big book, same thing they did with the traditions in the 12 and 12. Quite rightly, each new generation of AA world servants will be eager to make operational improvements. Unforeseen flaws in the present structure will doubtless show up later on. We're talking about continuous improvement here in the second paragraph. New service needs and problems will arise that may make structural changes necessary. Such alterations should certainly be effected and these contingencies squarely met. So here's Bill Wilson saying, do not keep your thinking in the past. If things need to change structurally, AA must change. It must stay relevant, etc., etc. Okay, we need to look for, we need to take inventory on how we structure AA as an organisation. Yet, Bill tempers this. We should always realise that change does not necessarily spell progress. We are sure that each new group of workers in world service will be tempted to try all sorts of innovations that may often produce little more than a painful repetition of earlier mistakes. Therefore, it will be an important objective of these concepts to forestall such repetitions by holding the experiences of the past clearly before us. And if mistaken departures are nevertheless made, these concepts may then provide a ready means of safe return to an operating balance that might otherwise take years of floundering to rediscover. So these two paragraphs, I think, represent what the concepts are all about, which is think this way, but be careful. Don't let go of the other way of thinking when you think this way or the other way. There's always sort of this tug in the opposite direction of wherever a paragraph or a sentence is suggesting we go. So it's always about do this, but consider this. Think about the future, but remember the past. Think about change, but don't think about changing the things that are actually working. So it's a really nice example of that. And let's keep reading. One more thing. What we're saying in general service, therefore, is that the concepts are there to help us run AA, be it a district area level, in a trusted, servant, spiritual way. The traditions, therefore, are not. And often I see people trying to use traditions to unpack problems and challenges at district, area, national level, or group level. And often you hit a wall with them because it's in fact the concepts that unpack and frame general service. And so we need to understand them as well as steps and traditions, because often the answer to problems doesn't lie specifically in steps and traditions. It's not their purpose. It's in the concepts. There will also be seen in these concepts a number of principles which have already become traditional to our services, not our service, but our services, but which have never been clearly articulated and reduced to writing. So this is Bill going, there's a gap. Now we're big enough, we've grown enough, we're organised enough, yet because of the traditions we need to be minimally organised. There are things that we've learned along the way we need to record. For example, the right of decision. So we go into decision making now, gives our service leaders a proper discretion and latitude. So that's about the balance between groups telling a delegate what to do, for example, before they go to a conference, and that delegate being able to articulate and think for themselves. Both need to happen. Trust and faith need to go both ways. That's what right of decision is about. The right of participation gives each world servant a voting status commensurate with his or her responsibility. And that's about basically saying, if you're the DCM of a district, you probably do enough work to get a vote, not just the GSRs. Why would you want to be a DCM if you don't have some kind of a say, given that you're often doing more work than a GSR might? So right of participation, the idea of who gets a vote, it's not voted on, it's not based on, what the role is per se. It's about the responsibility contained within that work. And if you're responsible for something and it's weighty enough, you get a vote. It isn't just the groups. It's bigger than that. And participation further guarantees that each service board or committee will always possess the several elements and talents that will ensure effective functioning. So along with that responsibility of getting a vote and a say, you'll often find you get more talented, experienced, competent people sitting in certain roles, which is a part of the concepts. The idea of being competent at something is part of our concepts, and we'll get to the concept that it frames that up in one of these videos. The right of appeal protects and encourages minority opinion, and the right of petition makes certain that grievances can be heard and properly acted upon. So in other words, what they learnt prior to the concepts being written down is no one gets to go, okay, let's vote and now let's move straight on. No, we vote and then we still need to make sure that people have been heard. So before the vote and after the vote, there's a chance for discussion and consideration and sharing. That's one of the things they learned. It became one of our concepts, one of the ways we make decisions at any level within AA. These general principles can, of course, be used to good effect throughout the entire structure. So in other words, it isn't just general service where we can, or at the group level or at the bottom level, general sort of national, the National AA Australia conference, we can actually use these decision-making protocols any way we like within AA. So there's lots of learning, there's lots of wisdom being shared within our concepts, and I think it's always good to remember they came third. They came after the steps and recovery became established within AA and AA culture. Then the traditions, which basically suggest how we need to accord ourselves as members to create unity rather than disunity. And then out of those two areas, steps and traditions, finally we needed to work out how to be an organisation globally. You know, we have apparently around 2,000 meetings a week in Australia. We have 24 areas currently in Australia. That's lots of groups. There's lots of organisation. Things need to be coordinated to some extent. And that's what the concepts seek to flesh out. It's very exciting stuff. Okay. Oh, I'm going backwards, not forwards. I apologise. So let's look at concept one. And I guarantee we'll jump straight into the concepts from this video forth. It reads, the final responsibility and the ultimate authority for AA World Services should always reside in the collective consciousness, not of the groups, but of our whole fellowship, including the groups. So this is one of the things we need to maybe debunk or get our heads around, that the whole fellowship is responsible for AA World Services, what we would call in Australia general service. The whole fellowship matters. Okay? I do hear some people say, for example, in AA, groups have all the power. No, they have a lot of it. But, there are other entities that also get a vote, for example, than just groups. And so the whole fellowship needs to coordinate and be unified for AA to make good decisions, sound decisions, to be healthy organisationally. Let's have a look at our conference structure for a moment. They played around with it for a couple of years in the early 50s. 55 it was ratified. Bill and Bob were effectively, the heads of AA, if you will, our founders, but they knew their time was close to being up. They were getting older, not younger, so they handed over the keys to the fellowship to the AA groups. But then, to get things organised as AA would grow, they needed a structure that allowed, quick, sensible decision-making to happen over a reasonable time frame. And so this structure is all about representing the groups, but also being a healthy organisation, keeping up, getting things done, not missing out on opportunities, etc. You'll notice at the bottom, there's a board. We have a board in, this is the American structure I'm showing you now. It's a great diagram. I mainly picked it because of the colour and the simplicity of it. In Australia, the only difference, by the way, is we would have AA Australia Limited and possibly the publication that would equate to the Grapevine, even though it isn't a separate entity, is AA Around Australia, and etc. So that structure is all about here's where all the members are, the groups, but to actually be a functional organisation, we need this structure going down so that we have less heads making more decisions over a shorter time frame, which actually keeps us functional. But down here, you can see where I'm moving my mouse, it's still about representing the voice of AA in totality. And that's really what the concepts are all about. So let's start looking at the Concept 1 essay. I'm going to pick a few paragraphs and raise a few points. The fact had to be faced that this is the Concept 1 essay. The fact had to be faced that AA's founders were perishable. Bill and Bob weren't going to live forever. When Dr. Bob and I had gone, this is Bill writing in the first person voice, who would then advise the trustees, the board members, in our case, AA Australia, who could link our little known board to our thousands of groups. That remains a challenge to this day. We have a board in Alcoholics Anonymous Australia. They have a board over in America and Canada. And the board needs to connect to the thousands of groups. That's a challenge. For the first time, it was seen that only a representative conference could take the place of Dr. Bob and me. In other words, you don't want, in America, 1.5 million people turning up somewhere to all have a vote and a say every year when AA needs to look at changing things. And so we need a smaller number of people representing the large number of people so that decision-making is even possible. This gap simply had to be filled without delay. Such a dangerous open end in our affairs could not be tolerated. We have to be able to keep up and make sensible decisions that are spiritual enough and represent the voice of the fellowship as a whole. Tough, and this is how we do it. Highlighted bit, regardless of trouble or expense, we had to call an AA General Service Conference and deliver our world services into its permanent keeping. So the conference in America, it's over 100 delegates. Some of them are delegates of areas. I think there's 92 areas in America and Canada. We have 24 in Australia. It's geographical, of course. And there's there's the board members and certain number of general service office staff as well. I think the overall conference, I'm not sure of the numbers, it's around 130, somewhere like that. So you've got about 130 people, for example, thereabouts, stuck in a room making decisions for 1.5 million members. And that's sane, because the 1.5 million, that's a lot of discussion before you go to a vote. So we all get to replace Bill and Bob, either directly if you are a delegate at conference, or if you're a group member via your GSR, who then communicates their voice to the delegate, who then goes to conference. Okay, clear as mud. It continues. It took a little imagination to see that future collapse would be the certain penalty if we did not act boldly and decisively. Thus, by the way, boldly and decisively, they're lovely terms to remember when we're making decisions in AA. It's okay to be bold, it's okay to be decisive. That can still be spiritual as long as we're being selfless enough to listen to each other, etc. Thus, propelled by events, we did take the necessary action. Now that the conference, bolded, is in its second decade, this is Bill writing in 1960, we find that our former fears of the troubles a conference might involve were largely groundless. The results of the conference have exceeded our highest expectations. In other words, this idea of, over 100 people representing over 1 million, it works. The delegates were listening to the groups and what they wanted to some degree. And those groups were happy to trust that individual to make decisions on their behalf. Did you listen to their own higher power, the higher power in the room in that conference, etc.? Trust, faith, spirituality. To me, it all goes back to program. At the end of the day, it all goes back to, am I living the way of life that is suggested via our 12 steps? Am I living a life where I'm trusting God, having faith that things will be okay? It now stands proven that the AA groups can and will take the final responsibility for their world services. Okay, sometimes directly, sometimes through having trust and faith in their chosen, delegated, trusted servants. Conference can work well. I have found it cannot work well at some levels when people don't trust their delegates or demand the delegate just be, an order taker. and the concepts sort of unpack why that isn't effective or spiritual. So we move on. There were other reasons why this basic shift for ultimate responsibility and authority to AA as a whole. These reasons centre around Tradition 2. So Tradition 2 is a very strong connection point out to our 12 concepts, and we're about to find out why. Which declares, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. So in other words, imagine your group has a strong opinion on one of our annual conference topics. Well, for a start, you might talk about that topic at group level, but ultimately what you want is God's opinion expressing his or herself through that group conscience discussion at your AA group level. So what we're always passing on to our delegate on a good day is not so much that group's opinion as a loving God expressing himself through you as an AA group. And ultimately, therefore, it's God's opinion. So that's all about how you conduct your group consciences. I know in my group conscience, we ask God to be in the room with us, to guide our discussion. And when we achieve consensus, it really feels like it's God driving that consensus, not just someone giving up because some other person has a louder voice. So that's how it works at the group level. We pass on God's opinion expressing itself through our group conscience, and then we ask our delegate to go to conference, for example. We ask our DCM to go to the area committee meeting, whatever it is, whatever level, and hopefully they're doing the same thing. They're asking God for guidance. We're asking God to express him or herself through that level of decision-making in our general service structure. To reinforce that point, it says at Tradition 2, our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. Well, of course they don't govern. They're trusting and being a servant-focused because ultimately it's God who needs to. So this is all program, right? It's no different than me doing step 11 in the morning. God, what would you have me do for you and others today? My job is to be of service to others and letting you, God, speak through my actions in all of my interactions with others, with all of my decision-making. God, please be there helping me make decisions. So to me, I see the entire way we make decisions in general service as almost being completely the same as how we make decisions in our personal lives and in our AA lives as individual members. So Tradition 2, like all other AA traditions, it goes on, is the voice of experience based upon the trials of thousands of groups in our pioneering time. So, it's been forged via many arguments and many resolutions to arguments in the early days of AA. The main principles of Tradition 2 are crystal clear. Here it comes, the AA groups are to be the final authority. Their leaders are to be entrusted with delegated responsibilities only. So if I'm the delegate of my area, for example, or if I'm the DCM, if I'm the area chair or whatever it is at a lower level, my job is to be entrusted with what my group's authority is telling me to do or to think or to feel. And it's tricky, right? Because I know in the area I'm currently involved in, there's over 200 groups. Well, we often get up to 25 or 30 GSRs turning up and to an area assembly, and they all want different things, and their group has an individual voice. And if you are an area delegate, for example, then you have to listen to all those voices and then ask God for guidance as to, well, okay, I've listened to all of the GSR's voices, all these different groups. Please help me find an opinion to vote with and move forward on, because that's what they're entrusting me to do. I have no authority here other than delegated authority and responsibility. I'm there to act on my group's behalf and AA's welfare as well, but I can't favour one group over another. God help me out. How similar is that to step 11? Anyway, Tradition 2 had been written in 1945, and our trustees had then authorised its publication. Oh, by the way, before we move on, here's delegate. That's what it means. So what is a delegate, or to delegate? A person sent or authorised to represent others, in particular an elected rep sent to a conference. So that's out of the Oxford language. It's almost like perfectly describing what happens nationally once a year when we have an area delegate go. It also means to entrust a task or responsibility to another person, typically who is less senior than oneself. And again, that's exactly as our structure works. The area delegate may have more time up, more general service experience, but they are less senior in terms of our service structure. So that's what a delegate is, and that's how delegation works. They represent groups. But we're always asking God for guidance. Otherwise, it ain't AA, it ain't spiritual. Tradition 2, like all the AA traditions, is the voice of experience based upon the trials of thousands of groups. Sorry, I've read that out already. Tradition 2 had been written in 45, and our trustees had then authorised its publication. But, that's the board, by the way, trustees. But it was not until 51 that the first experimental General Service Conference was called to see whether Tradition 2 could be successfully applied to AA as a whole, including its trustees and founders. They all turned up to see if they could represent all of the groups. Is this idea of having a small number of people entrusted with making decisions on behalf of the large number of people's behalf? Does that actually work? Are we actually asking God? Is God here? Is this crazy or not? It had to be found out whether the AA groups, by virtue of this conference, could and would assume the ultimate responsibility for their world service operation. Or would they just act out, try and take over, give up, look away, not bother? Blah, blah, blah. It took 5 years more for all of us to be convinced that Tradition 2 was for everybody. But at St. Louis in 55, we knew that our General Service Conference, truly representing the conscience of AA worldwide, was going to work and work permanently. And part of that permanence was beyond 55, country by country, general service structures have been set up. So now you've got general service happening separate to AA World Service in America and Canada, places like the UK, New Zealand. The long list of countries goes on, including Australia. So this idea of delegates representing much larger groups, as well as asking God for guidance to make decisions independent of those groups at times, God give me guidance. It seems to work on a good day. So, did every member turn up to St. Louis? No, there weren't 1.5 million people there, or how many millions there were, or hundreds of thousands there were in 55. No, a small group of people representing the large group. And that's how this works in AA. Trust and faith both times. Both ways, I mean. Trust and faith both ways. Small group represents large group. That's pretty much how the service structure works. We move on to the back end of the essay. So I'm not going to show you every paragraph from the essays. I am being selective to just create a few points per essay, things for you to think about. I do encourage you to read the entire thing. Okay, perhaps many of us are still vague about the group conscience of Alcoholics Anonymous, about what it really is. Oh my goodness me, this could be a solution to many of you viewing this. As to why you're viewing this, it's because, well, what is the group conscience? What does that actually mean? Throughout the entire world today. Now, this is Bill Wilson having an opinion on outside issues. By the way, throughout the entire world today, we are witnessing the breakdown of group conscience. It has always been the hope of democratic nations that their citizens would always be enlightened enough, moral enough, and responsible enough to manage their own affairs through chosen representatives. So think about local government, state government, federal government here in Australia. Think about the way perhaps your organisation, if it's a larger organisation where you work, how that works. You know, doesn't your manager go and represent the team at management meetings and come away with things for the team to do? But equally, they'll often take the team's voice to that meeting. So, you know, the workplace doesn't work much different than AA. But it's really interesting that Bill has this view that the world was becoming less moral, less enlightened, and less responsible. And, you know, who knows how we'd think about the world in 2022 when I'm making this video. But, you know, the idea, what we're doing in AA is very similar to what democratic nations are doing. People need to know enough and care enough and be humble enough, moral enough to actually make good decisions and trust those making decisions for them. But in many self-governing countries, we are now seeing the inroads of ignorance, apathy, and power-seeking upon democratic systems. I don't want to sound controversial here, but that sentence reminds me of some district and area committee meetings that I've attended. Their spiritual resources of right, purpose, and collective intelligences are waning. Consequently, many a land has become so helpless that the only answer is dictatorship. So Bill is making a case here, really strong case, that if people don't give a crap, if groups and members in AA, for example, don't give a crap about how AA works nationally as an organisation, someone's going to step up and take over. And it's, in fact, let's look at the reason why. Ignorance, apathy, and power seeking, character defects. And right now I'm sitting recording this video in a part of AA in Australia that does not have an area committee or a delegate. And to be honest, how is that possible unless people don't know one is required, don't care one is required, or someone in the past tried to take over and everyone else got their nose out of joint and walked away. Do you know what I mean? It's like this is a very true sentiment. And so we want participation in general service. What we actually need is people reading, caring, being responsible, and not making excuses why they can't. It's very, very powerful. Happily for us, there seems little prospect of such a calamity in AA. So now this is Bill being hopeful. And I am going to reiterate this one more time. I'm saying this right now in AA Australia, where we have quite a number of areas that aren't participating in general service at all. The life of each individual and of each group is built around our 12 steps and 12 traditions. Very important to remember. We very well know that the penalty for extensive disobedience to these principles is death for the individual and dissolution for the group. Now, he's making no distinction between adherence to what is suggested in the Big Book, steps, and 12 traditions. We need to adhere to them equally for AA unity and personal growth spiritually to happen. The alternative is death either way. An even greater force for AA's unity, traditions, unity, is the compelling love that we have for our fellow members and for the principles upon which our lives today are founded. So, in fact, general service, he is suggesting here, goes back to our commitment to recovery. How spiritually awakened are we? How altruistic and selfless are we? I always go back to that part of there is a solution in the Big Book. My very life depends upon my constant thought of others and how to meet their needs, how to help them. If that's not where I am in my recovery, I'm going to struggle doing general service. But if that's where I am in my recovery, or we are in ours, general service should work really well. And this is what Bill's hope was for AA. If we all just have that spiritual awakening and allow God to turn us into selfless versions of ourselves, then we can actually have a strong general service structure. We can do general service and grow AA, and through growing AA, grow ourselves. Therefore, it continues, we believe that we see in our fellowship a spiritualised society. Look at me, I've jumped over a few bits here. I'm going to go back to the last point here. Therefore, we believe that we see in our fellowship a spiritualised society characterised by enough enlightenment, enough responsibility, and enough love of man or women and of God to ensure that our democracy of world service will work under all conditions. And that's all we're talking about here. Enlightenment, in other words, study this stuff, learn this stuff. Responsibility, don't wait for the other person to do it. For that you are responsible, for that I am responsible, and enough love. And I include alcoholics who haven't found AA yet. And service to God. Then our structure would work. We'd have a lot of participation. We are confident that we can rely upon tradition too, our group conscience, and its trusted servants. I'm going to say it one more time. The large group being represented by the small group who are truly wanting to represent the large group. Hence it is with a sense of great security that we old-timers have now fully vested in AA's General Service Conference the authority for giving shape through the labours of its chosen delegates, trustees and service workers to the destiny that we trust God in his wisdom is holding in store for all of us. Okay, so what that's saying is delegates, including GSRs, Trustees, service workers acting on the group's behalf trustedly. We have to, if we've got any shot of staying relevant and in existence, we've got to let those small number of people who represent us make decisions and trust that when they feel they need to, they'll confer with us, but at times they'll be making decisions without doing that. And that can create a lot of consternation in AA. But what this paragraph is suggesting is it's our only hope. Rather than control, we have faith. And if we get the balance right, going back to the groups for their say-so, and those groups allowing the delegates to have their say-so at times without coming back, AA has the best shot it has of being incredibly relevant and incredibly helpful to alcoholics now and in the future. This is the exciting part of the traditions. So concept 1 summary. We are encouraged to view the suggestions contained within our traditions and concepts as being as life-saving and death-avoiding as the steps. Our legacies are equal in spiritual meaning and intent. All right? Unity, service, recovery, all equal. Your group has a voice if they want to have one. However, it must often be carried via a trusted servant down our structure. Area delegates, DCMs, for example, who also get to think for themselves. There are many groups to be heard, and each is spiritually free to have its own view and voice. Our trusted service must be spiritually fit and selfless enough to let their higher power, the ultimate authority, direct their thinking. This makes it easy for us to trust them and for them to trust us. And that's general service. More will be revealed in concept 2. Cheers.